Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Test Management with TestRail webinar. I'm the TestRail Product Manager, Simon Knight. I've got a few housekeeping announcements just before we get started with the webinar proper. So we're planning on around about 60 minutes for the webinar, and we'll be using the GoToWebinar chat console to take questions throughout the course of the webinar. We've got Jacob Scott, one of our support engineers, ready to take your questions in that console. And hopefully at the end of the webinar, we should have around 20 minutes or so to take any questions and respond to any additional comments or questions that we get as well. We will be keeping everybody on mute throughout the entire webinar, as you'd expect. So as I mentioned, if you do have any questions or comments, please feel free to share those in the chat room. And just to let you know, we are recording the webinar. So once the video has been processed, you should get a link to the webinar recording over the next 24 hours or so. Okay, so without further ado, what is test management? And more specifically, what is test management in the TestRail world? Those are the questions I'm going to be trying to provide answers to during the course of this webinar. And the first one, what is test management, is relatively straightforward. So I'm going to start with that. And then what I'm going to do is try to use the answer to that question to kind of frame all of the other stuff that I'm going to talk about for the rest of the webinar. So in my view, test management is or can be defined as the process of delivering the set of testing activities necessary for supporting or mitigating quality and other risks as they relate to the successful development and release of a given product. Probably some of you might object to that definition in some shape or form. Perhaps you adhere to a more formal ISTQB definition, or maybe you belong to some other school of thought in the testing world. You might be more context driven, for example, or maybe you're a fan of the modern testing principles. But I think for the purposes of this webinar, that definition is okay. I stand by it, so I'm going to stick with that definition just for the purposes of this webinar and move on. So I'm going to talk a little bit about requirements. TestRail integrates with a wide variety of external tools, and the integration and configuration of those tools is pretty simple in all cases. I feel like I've missed a slide here somewhere where I was going to talk about requirements a little bit more generally, but never mind, I'm going to carry on. So whether you're using an external system, Jira or Assembler, for example, or some other mechanism to track your requirements, for example, Excel or Word documentation, it really makes good sense to be able to reference those items in your test cases so that you've got traceability back to any relevant documentation or other sources of information that are being used to inform the scope and the design of your test cases, so that that information does indeed inform the design of your test cases, and so that later on you can demonstrate test coverage of your requirements should you need to. And I think how those requirements are themselves organized into deliverables So milestones, releases, sprints, iterations, that kind of thing, can also help to inform how you organize and subsequently report on the testing activities and results of your testing in TestRail. So how you use runs, plans, and milestones in TestRail itself. So as I mentioned, we integrate with a wide variety of external tools, and those can all be used in Jira to help you, in TestRail rather, to help you manage your requirements and link to those requirements from your test cases. And no matter how you are actually handling your requirements, probably they are encapsulated in some form of project. So that's where we're going to start our test management journey in TestRail in this webinar, with a very quick dive into which type of project is going to be best for you. So as you can see on this slide here, out of the box, TestRail has 3 types of projects that you can use to organize and manage your testing activities. Single repository with baseline support, and multiple test suite repositories. We recommend that for most people and projects, a single suite repository is going to work just fine. And it's going to provide you with a single repository for all of your cases that you can manage without any further configuration effort. It's the fastest, simplest approach. If you wish or need to segregate your cases beyond the test section and folder capabilities that single suite mode provides you with, you can split your cases over multiple suites in a multi-suite project. And this needs a little bit more, this demands a little bit more configuration overhead in terms of managing those suites. So, we'd suggest that you only do that if you really need to. And what you're going to end up with is something that looks like this. So your test case is split out across multiple suites. And if you need to work with multiple versions of your test cases at the same time, for example, so that you can have different versions of the same cases for different supported platforms or devices. So you might have your sort of legacy test cases for an application, and then a newer set of test cases for the subsequent iteration of that application. Then you can use a baseline project for this purpose. It allows you to have different versions of the same test cases for different supported platforms or devices. Again, though, it's not quite as straightforward as just having everything in the same repository. There's a little bit of additional configuration required, but not a huge amount. So once you've selected the project type that's best for you and for your team, then you're going to be ready to start designing your test cases. That's going to loop us nicely back around to requirements again. So if you do have some form of requirements documentation in the form of a formal requirements document, for example, or by way of tickets or issues in a tool such as Jira, then when you're creating your test cases, you can reference those items in the test case reference fields. So you can see here, I'm referencing a couple of Jira tickets in this example. And if you've got your tooling integrated with TestRail, so you might have a Jira instance connected or assembler or GitHub or something like that. Once you've got all of that configured and integrated successfully, adding your references to those items in your external tools is going to provide you with links that you can use to directly navigate to those issues in the integrated tool. So for example, if I clicked on one of these links, I'd end up in Jira. Depending on the tool that's been integrated, you might end up in GitHub or somewhere else. And it also means you're going to be able to hover over that information and pull some of the ticket details directly into TestRail, which is pretty helpful. And it's also going to provide you with traceability of what these test cases are actually covering in terms of your requirements. So if you're using Jira, you can also go a step further and using the plugin that we provide for Jira, you can actually track your cases, tests, and runs inside of Jira itself. If you wish, you can also add references to your test runs. So there's an example of a run with a reference on it there. Again, providing you with the link and the ability to hover over those links and pull in information to TestRail. In future TestRail releases, you'll actually be able to do that on plan entries and milestones as well. Basically, where it's possible to do so, I think it's good practice to reference requirements on your test cases wherever you can, since this is ultimately going to help you to demonstrate how your cases cover all of your requirements during testing and when you're doing any subsequent reporting on the progress and results of your testing. And hopefully, as I've demonstrated here, TestRail gives you lots of capabilities for doing that. And this principle of traceability is going to hold true whatever approach or methodology you're using for your testing. So whether you're using some flavor of waterfall, or whether you're more agile, or whether you're using some brand of continuous delivery or continuous testing, then adding references to your test cases is always going to help you to better understand what areas your test cases do and don't cover, and then to report on those things. Just while we're touching on methodology though, let's talk a little bit about what test case templates are going to be most useful or appropriate for which development methodology and testing approach combination. So out of the box, TestRail is going to provide you with 3 different templates that you can use for your testing. Each of them is going to be more or less suited to a particular kind of approach. Generally speaking, if you're following more of a waterfall approach, then the use of the test case steps template is going to be my recommendation. If you're scripting your test cases up front, as is the norm during waterfall type development, then using the test case steps template is going to give you a lot of flexibility still about how you actually define your test cases, and it's going to enable you to decompose your test scripts into sequences of steps and expected results. And each of those step and result pairs can be tested and reported on individually under the umbrella of your test case. And it's also going to provide you with the best framework for using those tests with business users. So when you need to engage the support of your business end users, for example, while carrying out user acceptance testing, this is gonna be a really good way of communicating the intent and the steps that are necessary to carry out business processes and the testing actions in a really clear, logical fashion for them. If you're using more of a Scrum or Agile approach, where you're testing in sprints, cycles, or iterations, then the use of the TestRail exploratory session template may be preferred. So the exploratory session template is going to give you a kind of loose framework for specifying your expected test coverage up front. So I appreciate this screenshot is a little bit small, and we can talk about this some more during the Q&A time if we want to. But basically, this provides you with a template for filling out details of your testing mission, so the overarching objective of the testing session that you're going to carry out. And you can add some more information about specific goals or items that you want to cover off during that testing session. Exploratory sessions in TestRail correspond quite closely with exploratory testing as it's defined or discussed by various sort of prominent folk in the testing space. So if you wanted to sort of dig into exploratory testing some more, then you could, for example, read James Whitaker's book, Exploratory Testing. You could do a quick Google search or whatever search tool you want to use for session-based test management by James and Jonathan Bark, and also James Lindsay's thread-based test management, for example. All of these are very good resources for learning more about exploratory testing generally, and more specifically, certainly in the case of session-based test management and thread-based test management, how to manage exploratory testing during a testing project. So if you want to find out more information about exploratory testing generally, I'd certainly recommend those resources. In any event, once you've spent some time identifying what you want to actually cover with your exploratory tests, then the general approach to an exploratory testing test project is going to be to execute, to define your tests to some extent, to execute those tests, and then review the results of your exploratory testing and iterate on them as needed based on the results of your testing sessions. And I think generally this approach has a number of benefits over writing detailed test scripts in advance of your testing, sort of waterfall style, because it takes a lot less effort to actually define the test cases up front, and often you're going to find the actual testing is more efficient and effective because you're not trying to adhere to test scripts that may have missed out some important information that was subsequently discovered during the testing. So definitely worth spending some time exploring exploratory testing as a testing approach. And as I mentioned, generally it's quite well suited to Agile or Scrum based projects. So finally, on the DevOps or sort of continuous testing approach, the main distinction that I'm drawing between the various development methods is the release artifact size. So when I'm talking about waterfall, really what I mean by that is big bang releases. So lots of functionality in one big release. When we're talking about agile, we're talking about slightly smaller releases more frequently. And when we come to a DevOps or a continuous delivery type approach, then we're talking about even smaller releases, potentially a single commit or pull request in that release. So when it comes to DevOps or continuous testing, I'm going to assume that you're following more of an automated approach in order to facilitate the vast majority of that testing, though you will almost certainly blend your test automation with some degree of manual testing as well, likely exploratory type testing. So when you're using TestRail for continuous automated testing, most likely you're going to be using test cases in TestRail as placeholders for the testing that's actually being carried out by your test automation framework. And as such, you can just use the default test case text template to name your test cases and store any additional information that's required in them for your testing efforts. And then when it comes to test execution, you can just create a test run and update the cases with results using the TestRail API. No matter which development methodology or template you actually end up using for your testing, when it comes to organizing your test cases in TestRail, there's some general principles you should follow. So generally speaking, we recommend organizing your tests by component or functional area. And TestRail sections can be organized and subsectioned pretty much however you please. So you should be able to find a way to do this that aligns with pretty well with how your project or your product is structured. I strongly recommend assigning priorities to your test cases. And then you can further use that prioritization to organize your cases at runtime. And if necessary, because of time constraints, for example, and what testing project isn't time constrained, you can use prioritization to determine the most important test cases you should be executing. So you can prioritize the very highest priority test cases, and then if and when you have time, execute the lower priority cases in due course. You can also use the type field on test cases to further refine or organize your test cases should you need to. And you can always create additional fields and templates to better suit the specifics of your team and methodology. And in TestRail, you've always got the option of adding or customizing the out-of-the-box templates and fields as needed. So I mean, my general recommendation in terms of organizing your test cases is just to experiment and see what works best for you, what works best for your team, your organization, your product. TestRail's really flexible about how you organize stuff. So in general, it's just a matter of figuring out what works best for you. Once you've actually got your test cases created for the scope of the testing that you want to do, and assuming that your system or your product is ready to test, then you're going to be ready to create some test runs and actually start executing your tests. Once again, the specifics of how you define a test run is going to vary somewhat based on your methodology. And, you know, as I've already mentioned, based on how your product is organized, how you're running your project, your team and culture, and various other things. I'm going to focus more on the methodology side of things, but it's by no means the only determining factor in terms of how you organize your test runs. If you're using more of a waterfall-based, then, as I already mentioned, you're talking about a lot of functionality in one big release. So there's a few ways that you could approach organizing your test runs. You could just include all of the tests that you've created in a single run, and then use assignment or prioritization or some other filtering approach to control how you want to sequence and actually execute those tests. You can create several runs and just split them up according to different areas of functionality, selecting specific sections or cases, or applying filters to determine what you actually include in those runs as needed. Or you could create runs according to the type of testing that you're doing. For example, functional testing, acceptance testing, user acceptance testing, regressions, that kind of thing. And certainly when I've worked on waterfall projects in the past, that's how I've tended to organize my test runs, is based on the activity. Although, as I mentioned, you can also split it up in these other different ways as well. And there's a good case for organizing your various runs under the umbrella of test plans and milestones as well, but I'll come to that in a few minutes. The same kind of principles are going to apply when you're creating runs on an agile project. Your runs are likely just going to be a bit smaller, a bit tighter, because the agile or Scrum methodology that you're working with is geared towards smaller, tighter, more incremental deliverables. So you can still create runs using the all cases approach, or by selecting specific tests or applying a filter. If you're applying more of an exploratory approach, then you've got the option of using our new dynamic filter. Of course, you can use this in other areas as well. This is just one example that I thought of for this webinar. So how you might use this for exploratory testing, you could define a couple of folders in your test cases, a couple of sections with the exploratory sessions for the features in those sections. And then you can create a new dynamic filter run and apply a filter for only those sections that you've created for that functionality. And then once you've run an initial few testing sessions, then based on the results of those sessions, if you decide to add further exploratory sessions to those sections, then so long as you create them in the sections that you've filtered on in your dynamic test run, then they'll just get added to the run, and you'll be able to see that they still need to be executed before the run is actually completed. And again, it may also make sense to organize your runs into a plan or plans under milestones. And with regards to DevOps and sort of continuous delivery, continuous testing approaches, there shouldn't be too many surprises in terms of how you actually organize your test runs. broadly speaking, again, you're going to organize those as you would do for Agile or Scrum-based projects. You could also organize them according to your testing activities as for waterfall projects. Probably the main distinction when it comes to DevOps and continuous testing is the fact that, you know, most of that testing is going to be automated. So the distinction is going to be on how those runs are actually created in the first place. And to the extent that you are using automated testing, probably you're going to want to use the TestRail API to create your test runs and report back on the results of your testing. TestRail's got a very flexible API, and it's got a huge number of endpoints that you can use to facilitate your test automation efforts in pretty much any way you want to. But from a very basic perspective, you can accomplish the vast majority of your test automation and the reporting of your automated test results using just a couple of API endpoints. You can use the add run endpoint to create a run in your project, and you can use that endpoint to pass in the case IDs for all of the tests that you want to include in that run. And then you can just use the add results for cases endpoint to add results for all of the cases in the run that you created. And that's it. That's really all there is to it. Using those endpoints, you can also pass in information about milestones so that those runs can be tracked against a release or a sprint. And using this approach, specifically the add results for cases endpoint, that's actually adding results based on the case ID. So what it means is you're tracking the results against the original cases, and it just makes reporting and tracking metrics against all of your test cases really nice and easy, and it means you're going to have a history of all of the testing that you've carried out for that test case from the point of creation. So, you know, it's a really, really good approach. It's also a very performant means of utilizing the TestRail API. Some teams may prefer to update test or case results individually as they're being executed. So rather than adding all of the results in bulk, they're adding their results individually as those test cases are actually being executed. But from an API usage perspective, you know, that consumes a lot of bandwidth. So while on the one hand, it might be nice to see those results in real time, it's a much more efficient way of using the API. Just wait until the test execution's finished and then add all of the results in bulk. Okay, so I've mentioned the use of plans and milestones a couple of times. You can use plans and milestones in TestRail to further organize and manage your testing efforts, but it's entirely optional. From a functional perspective, in TestRail, you could get away with just using cases and runs, and you know, you can report on all of your testing that way. But organizing your runs into plans and milestones does generate some additional benefits for your status and reporting efforts. The main benefit of organizing your runs into a plan is that the testing statistics from all of your runs is going to roll up or be aggregated into the overall results for that plan. So you're consolidating all of the metrics from all of the tests in all of your runs into one place, into your test plan. So what that means is if you want to see the status, the activity, the progress, or defect metrics for all of your tests, for all of your runs in one place, you can do that by creating those runs in a test plan. Similarly, if you want to roll up the metrics from all of your runs and all of your plans into one place, then you can use milestones for that. And if anything, milestones are slightly more user-friendly than, since once you've created a plan, you can't retrospectively add runs to it. You have to create the test plan first and then add runs to that plan. But with milestones, once you've created your milestone, you can just go into your plans and your runs and change the milestone or set the milestone setting in your run or your plan, and then all of those things are just going to roll up into your milestone in the same way as they did for the plan. So all of your tests for all of your runs for all of your plans in one place, giving you access to your status, your progress, all of your defects, all of that stuff in one single dashboard, which is, very helpful. And the other benefit of using plans and milestones is going to be all of the additional reporting options that you get by doing so. So for runs, plans, and milestones, you've always got the option of using the print button for a dump of all of your tests in the run, plan, or milestone. For plans and milestones, just clicking on your report option here is going to give you all of the test results for all of the runs in your plan. And if you do that against a milestone, then again, it's going to give you all of the test results for all of your runs and your plans against that milestone. So again, just rolling up all of your testing statistics into one place. And on runs, plans, and milestones, you've also got dedicated reports which are available to you at the various levels as well. So I just wanted to touch on this real quickly. So at run, plan, and milestone level, you can generate, for example, summaries of all of your defects by clicking on the reports drop down at the level for which you want to report. So that could be a run, it could be a plan, it could be a milestone. And you can also group your defects by cases or reference. You can generate summary reports for the level you're at, so milestone here, but equally it could be plan or run. And you can report on all of your testing results, comparing them across your cases or for references, or if you want to define your own property for comparison purposes, you can do that as well. And the benefit of generating your reports this way, rather than going into the dedicated report section, is if you click on one of these options at, for example, milestone level, then TestRail is gonna do a little bit more of the report configuration work for you, automatically populating some of the report settings based on the view or level at which you generated that report. So just worth bearing in mind there. Okay, so I'm going to try and wrap things up a little bit. What I've tried to do during this webinar is run through how you can think about and approach test management based on how TestRail functions in terms of workflows, and what testing looks like in my experience based on the different methodologies that you can use for development. So I've talked about traceability and how, as a general principle, it's always going to be really helpful if you can trace your tests back to specific artifacts, whether those are formal requirements, tickets, issues, features or epics, or even pull requests. I've also talked about how TestRail helps and guides you in respect of designing your test cases in whatever form those take, and how you can organize those cases for test execution and subsequent reporting and runs, plans, and milestones. Creating and organizing your tests in this way also helps you to maintain, reuse your test cases and your test runs and your plans over the course of time, should you need to. And I've also talked very briefly about how you can use TestRail's API to facilitate automated test reporting very quickly and easily using just a couple of endpoints. Obviously, all the other ones are available to you as well, though. And I've shown how you can roll up the results of all of your testing into potentially more easily digestible dashboards and reports by consolidating your runs into plans and milestones. So if you're using TestRail, then the organization of your testing assets is going to look pretty similar for all the different methodologies, because that's how TestRail works, to make your life as easy as possible. We've tried pretty hard to keep things very simple and flexible in TestRail, so that you can experiment and find the way that works best for you, for your team, for your project. Obviously, though, how you execute your testing is likely to look a little bit different depending on the development methodology being used. So just to conclude, if you're mainly using a waterfall approach, I suggest you use references to provide requirements, traceability on your test cases. The test case steps template is probably your go-to template for test cases scripted up front of actually starting your test execution in kind of classic waterfall fashion. You should organize your runs according to test activities. Certainly that's my preference anyway. Functional testing, regression, UAT, etc. And organize your runs into plans and use milestones to aggregate and report on your testing progress and your results more easily. If you're mainly using an Agile or Scrum approach, again, use references to track back to features and epics and provide traceability on all of your test cases. Use exploratory sessions to manage exploratory testing approaches. Think about leveraging the dynamic filtering test runs to facilitate more iterative exploratory testing approaches. And again, use milestones and plans to roll up all of your testing results. I think milestones naturally map quite well to sprints, so you could certainly use a milestone approach to organizing your agile testing. And if you're delivering continuously, then again, use references to provide ticket or pull request traceability on your test cases. Use test case text templates as placeholders for your automated tests. Use the TestRail API to create test runs and report on your automated testing results. And then again, roll up your runs into milestones for easier reporting where it makes sense to do so. Okay, that's the main bit done. Jacob is reporting a whole bunch of questions.
Yeah, we've got a lot of questions coming in. So we're gonna we'll try to get to everybody. I know there's a lot of questions that have been rolling in. We'll do our best to answer as many as possible, but I don't know that we're going to be able to get to everybody here. So if we don't get to your question today, feel free to reach out to the support team at contact@gurock.com, and we'll be happy to help there. Just going to go down kind of in chronological order here. I know one person was asking about a potential bug where the page does not go back to where you were on a reload or test collapse. I'm not.
Yeah, I think that was fixed in a recent 6.2 release, 6.2.3, I believe. We patched that. So is that
I mean,
server customer? If it is, then I think they need to upgrade to 6.2.3, which has the fix for that issue in it. If they're on cloud, that's a little bit more worrying because they should already have the fix.
yeah. So Rob, if you are still experiencing the issue and you're not upgraded to the most recent version, please give that a shot. If you are still seeing that, definitely reach out to us. So we can get a better idea of what's happening there and help out with finding a fix for that. Okay, so for tests that you both run via exploratory and automated methods, would you recommend separate configurations so a given run is all automated bits? Generally, that's probably a good idea just to have things separated out. But again, it's definitely kind of up to you how you'd like to organize that information. I don't know, Simon, do you have any idea on that?
Yeah, I think certainly from so I mean, all of your cases are going to be executed inside of runs. You can use plans and milestones to group together your runs, but ultimately, anytime you're doing some testing, those are going to feed up into runs in some shape or form. My personal preference would be to keep automated testing separate from manual, exploratory, other kinds of testing generally, because the testing that is not automated or that has a different focus or methodology is likely to get reported on slightly differently. So for that reason alone, it would make sense to just split out automated from pretty much any other kind of testing that you're doing just for reporting and status purposes.
Cool. Let's see. Can this be used for a major program with multiple projects underneath using both Agile and Waterfall? Definitely. Yeah, there's not really any limitation to what you can do within your projects or within a single instance. So certainly you can set up multiple projects for different testing types.
Yeah, and if it was the same project that had waterfall and agile teams working on the same product or system from different angles, then you could still do that under a single project in TestRail if you want, and just use milestones and plans to organize the different test approaches.
Is it possible to track the status of one test case in different test runs? Yes, if you're viewing the test case itself, there is an option to the right. There's a tab for your test inside of a test case that'll show runs and results. So if you just go into one of your test cases here, on the right, you should have the tests and results tab there. And this will show the runs that it has been included in. And if you go to results and comments, you can also track what results, statuses, comments, different things like that have been assigned to this particular test case over time.
Nothing further to add on that one.
We've had a number of questions about the Jira integration. For anyone that does have questions about the Jira integration, we do have another recording of a webinar, of a previous webinar, that goes into much more detail about setting up the Jira integration and how to configure it and what the current processes are behind it. So I would recommend checking that out if you do have any questions about the Jira integration. This user asked for the Jira integration, each Jira user must have a TestRail user in order for it to work correctly. Is this going to change in the future? We are looking into different options for potentially storing data inside of Jira rather than having it be populated in real time. That said, there are no current like imminent plans for those changes. Still kind of in the early stages of working through any of those options. So I would not. I mean, we don't have any announcements to make in that regard yet. But it is something that we have received a lot of feedback about, so it's something that we are looking into for future releases. Is it possible to find a test case which is failing in every test run or from time to time? So really the best option would be to kind of go through the same thing we just detailed based on the the test case history. So if you want to go through your test cases directly, you can find that information there. I'm trying to think about a way to kind of get a if there would be. I mean, I guess you could run a report. I don't know. What do you think, Simon? What would be the best way to find a test case that consistently fails?
Yeah, there's some reporting that we could do to get that information. Can we make a note of that one and come back to it in maybe a response after the webinar?
Okay. I'll make a note of it here. I'll leave a note here. All right. What's the best way to track and record time estimates for test runs? Right now, it requires you to update test case statuses one by one with the start progress, whereas common practice is to update test results for test cases in bulk. Is there some quick way to get the time estimates, for example, time between creating a test run and until all test cases are completed?
I don't have a good answer for that right now, I'm afraid.
Yeah, that's a little bit of a tricky question there. Yeah, for that question, I'd recommend reaching out to the support team. That's something that we can look into, potentially give some feedback around ways to find a good way for that. I'd kind of need a little bit more context there as well.
It's an interesting question. I mean, it points towards maybe some improved reporting functionality to deliver that kind of information. And reporting is certainly something that we're looking for. We're looking at for improvements in a couple of releases time. So I mean, maybe if that person was interested in jumping on a call sometime soon, I'd certainly be happy to have a conversation about those specific requirements and any other interesting sort of reporting type problems that we can try to solve in a future release.
Awesome. All right. Is there a bulk update feature? Yes. If you go into your test cases, you can check any test cases you'd like and click on the edit option as Simon is demonstrating now. And here you can change different things. One thing to note about the bulk update or bulk editing is any changes you make will replace anything that's already been selected. So be careful that you don't overwrite any data in your system. You do typically just want to, if you want to append data to existing values that are already in your fields, then doing that individually is going to be the better way of setting that up. But you can definitely go in and make changes. So if you know that all of the things that you've selected should all have the same value, then you can make those changes there. Can these pie charts show detail when clicked? There's not anything currently that they show. They're not. There's not a.
Yeah,
they don't really go anywhere. Yeah, they don't. Down. Yeah, they're not interactable currently. But that is a cool idea and something that we'll definitely think about when we're looking at improvements for the overall metrics in the system. Can you annotate reports with comments? Not currently. That's one of the different requests that we've gotten for report improvements that we're currently collecting feedback around. So that's that's definitely something that we might be looking into in the future. Currently, reports kind of come out as is. There's not really a way to change or update them during the creation process. So that's but that is something that we are looking at different ways to improve the reporting process overall. And any feedback that you might have about how to improve reports, please send that to us again at contact@gurock.com. How can we use the same test cases for different project runs? You would need to copy the test cases between projects. So what you can do is when you're viewing your test cases inside of one project, click on the copy move link there. It's going to be the one to the left there, the 2 sheets of paper. And then you select the source project where you would like to copy your test cases from. And then once you select a project in the suite, then you can choose your test cases or your full sections and copy them into the project that you're setting up your test run in. From there, you will have all of the you'll have that information there. So you can copy that in just as you would and use those test cases as needed that way. So that's going to be the best way to set that up. We do recommend copying rather than moving, as if you move a test case out of a project, it has the potential to lose any data that's currently associated with those test cases. If you've got any open test runs that include those test cases, those tests will be removed from those open runs, along with any results that have been attached to them. So we definitely recommend using the copy function rather than the move function, just to avoid any potential data loss. All right, I know we're running short on time here. If you want to keep going, we've still got plenty. But like I said at the beginning, if we didn't get it to anybody's question today, please feel free to reach out to us at contact@gurock.com. We also have 2 more webinars this week, so feel free to join us for those, and we'll be happy to continue answering any questions there.
So yeah, I think we should try and wrap things up because it's very rapidly approaching the hour. As Jacob mentions, we do have a webinar tomorrow, so meet TestRail. Probably that's more of an introductory TestRail webinar, but you're welcome to join us for that if you wish. And then Jacob, you've got a webinar on Thursday, don't you? Starting to test with TestRail, which I guess covers a lot of the same kind of stuff as we have in this webinar, but in more of a hands-on sort of demonstration type fashion rather than more of a conceptual approach that I took today.
Right, yeah, this is definitely much more just how it functions rather than, you know, how to organize.
Yeah. So with that said, as Jacob also mentioned, you know, please do feel free to reach out to us via the contact@gurock.com email address. We're certainly very happy to hear from and speak with our customers about ways that we can improve the product. The product management team is certainly happy to jump on the phone with people and have conversations about, you know, some of the challenges that you have using TestRail, or, you know, ways that we can improve the product in various different ways. So always happy to hear from you. But yeah, I think we've reached the end of this particular webinar. So thank you very much, everybody, for joining. Thanks, Jacob, for fielding all of the questions, and we will see you at the next one. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.